Hey everybody, welcome to Writing with Scholarly Sources and Avoiding Plagiarism. I'll be talking about three kind of common writing assignments you might find in education classes and in education research. Those are annotated bibliographies, research papers, and literature reviews, which of course you'll be working on this week as part of your proposal process. So what is education research, just to start off? Well, one definition says, education research is a scientific field that examines education and learning processes and the human attributes, interactions, organizations, and institutions that shape educational outcomes. Scholarship in the field seeks to describe, understand, and explain how learning takes place throughout a person's life and how formal and informal contexts of education affect all forms of learning. Education research then embraces the full spectrum of rigorous methods appropriate to the questions being asked and also derives the development of new tools and methods. In other words, education research is a broad area study that focuses on all aspects of teaching and learning in a variety of contexts. There are three basic forms of educational research. You have theoretical research, which seeks to resolve research problems through the generation of new knowledge and the introduction and development of theory. Certainly you've taken courses where you learned about different approaches to the classroom or approaches to research, and those are theoretical approaches, right? They're kind of frameworks through which we understand the world. They're theories, right? Applied or development research seeks to resolve research problems through the implementation of solutions to address the problem. This is applied research means you take ideas from things like theories or take ideas from practice and put them into place somewhere and see if they solve the problem that you're interested in researching, right? Is a very common form of research in practical fields like education, right, where you're working with students in a variety of contexts. Evaluation research seeks to resolve research problems by determining the extent to which solutions have been successful in addressing the problem, right? So theoretical is looking at kind of the big picture, what are our approaches to education, to teaching and learning, right? Applied research then takes ideas and actually puts them into action. And evaluation research looks at things that are actually happening either through applied research, right? We tried this new idea, or just because things happen as you do the work of teaching and learning, right? And it seeks to kind of evaluate what's actually already happening in these contexts, and is it working, is it not working? It's a great way to find new areas for potential research. Types of research are related to, but not exclusive to, or not the same as, types of methodologies. Methodologies are theoretical in nature, and they're tied to the practical nature of what you're studying as well. And these are the ways in which we're trying to get the answers to the questions we're asking in our research questions, right? So can we answer our research question best with what kind of methodology? Can we use quantitative research? That's research that collects and statistically analyzes numerical data, right? Things like survey research, right, where you just have people answer on a Likert scale, right? Correlational research, we try to find the relationships between different variables. And causal research, right, which is the next step beyond correlation, right, that they have a relationship, but that the relationship actually is one thing leads to the other. And this kind of research, you're usually talking about big data sets, right, lots of surveys, lots of collected data from a big set of people's survey responses, right? It also requires, hopefully if you've already taken your research methods or statistics course, you kind of understand the kinds of tools that quantitative research might require to use, including methods of analysis, right? And that's part of quantitative research. This is not a methods class, so I'm just going to go over the methodologies that you might employ for your proposal project. You won't actually have to do the research, so you won't have to worry too much about actually performing the quantitative analysis if you choose to do a quantitative proposal, right? That's something you can figure out later. But certainly by looking at other survey-based studies related to your topic or other similar topics, you could find instruments and tools for analysis that you could actually propose using as well in your research study. Kind of the opposite of quantitative, which is all about numbers and about big data sets and being anonymous and not connecting people specifically with the numbers that you're investigating, is qualitative research. That's research that collects information from local contexts where scholars can observe teaching and learning, right? And these are things like case studies and ethnographies. And ethnography is when you write about the experience as a participant in that experience. So this is what a lot of the kind of work we see in education and other social sciences fields involves qualitative research, where researchers are actually in a educational context and making observations through things like interviews to get personal information. You're dealing with smaller numbers of participants because it's not possible to collect a lot of data if you have one person conducting interviews or conducting surveys that allow for written responses rather than just filling in dots on a Likert scale, right? So quantitative research, right, you can put a survey on a computer and people can click and that computer automatically aggregates all the information. In qualitative research, computers aren't built to deal with that kind of human information, right? Now sometimes some of the strongest research comes from mixed methods research, and that's research that generally begins with a quantitative approach. It says, let's collect a bunch of data about all these variables, and then we'll pick out what's most interesting and follow up with particular people with a particular new research interest in mind based on that data. So the big picture data leads us to smaller questions that we might ask of a smaller group of people. So like a survey research followed by interviews to gather more situational or personal information. One particular kind of qualitative research that is common in education is called action research. And action research is research that actually collects and analyzes information from the researcher's own practice and own context. In other words, it might be a teacher researching the practices he or she uses in his or her actual classroom, right? So with the idea of improving teaching and learning. This is not oftentimes the kind of study that is published, except in some really specialized practitioner journals, but the kind of research that can lead you to bigger qualitative research that reaches outside of your own classroom to include kind of maybe your whole school environment or your school board environment, right? Or even statewide and nationwide research, right? So action research is certainly a viable option for an educational methodology and educational research. Generally speaking, the scholarly research process has to begin with you choosing a topic. You have to have a reason, an interest in something you're doing. In our case, I gave you a request for proposals to serve as a kind of prompt to get you thinking about specific projects that you might adopt, right? And I said choose a topic and go out and read some things about it, right? So you understand some things about it. That will allow you to kind of narrow your topic or refocus your topic, which will then hopefully allow you to formulate a research problem, which we'll talk about in the next lecture, and revise your research problem and devise research questions based on that. Because ultimately what research does is it seeks to answer the questions we ask about that topic. So how do you locate scholarly sources? Hopefully you all know how to use the library. It's fairly straightforward using the database system. If you have problems, please contact me. But one of the big things you want to think about is what is a credible source. So it's great to have the internet to do research. It can save you a lot of time and effort. But you have to be careful what you're using, because not everything on the internet is vetted, right, and is credible. There are plenty of published things that are not reliable sources on the internet. Now, if you use the library databases, those resources have been reviewed and included because they are from things like peer-reviewed journals. But there are other ways to use things, right? So treat sources without authors with skepticism. Encyclopedias, including Wikipedia, anonymous blogs, social media posts signed with only a username, right? These are things that don't have authors. Because exploring the credibility of the author can help you evaluate the credibility of the source. That is, the credibility of the source is only as reliable as the credibility of an author. If an author has some certain bias because of who they are, you need to be able to identify that. If they have certain expertise, right, that can help you establish credibility. Similarly, treat sources published commercially. Sites ending in .com and .net are less likely to be credible than .org, .edu, and .gov. So .org is nonprofit organizations. You still have to be a little bit careful with some of those, as some of those are politically motivated and may have biases. .edu, which is educational websites, right? And .gov, which are government websites. Because the primary purpose of commercial sites is not typically to inform, but to generate income through web visits or hits, right? So that's why we have these sensational news headlines, like we call them clickbait, right? It tries to get you to click on it. Then you read the article and you find out the title isn't necessarily well connected at all to what that title said, right? So the context of the source matters. Who is publishing the information is another way to help you evaluate the credibility of the source. And the most credible sources are peer-reviewed. More than just being published, then peer-reviewed sources have been read and validated by experts in the field. Library databases are typically filled with peer-reviewed sources. That's why I recommend you go there. Now, library databases will oftentimes offer you articles to which we don't have access through NSU. If you have time to get articles, you can request them through Interlibrary Loan, which is another link on the NSU website. NSU library website. It's called Interlibrary Loan, ILL. A lot of them they can get digitally from other sources, and then they'll email them to you. So that's really great. If you need to do something more quickly, you're just going to have to work with the things you have access to, as inconvenient as that might be. So one of the most common assignments you'll find in a research course is an annotated bibliography. An annotated bibliography is a way in which you can more deeply understand what you read and understand how it applies to your research, but also keep records for yourself that are useful and prevent you from having to go back and read the original source, right? So an annotated bibliography is basically a list of articles, book chapters, books, websites, whatever, what other kind of scholarly sources that are connected to your topic, speak to your topic, and you go ahead and you create those in APA style, a full citation. So you have that. If you use that source, then you just can copy it and paste it to the end of your research article, right? And underneath each of those citations then is an annotation that summarizes and critiques focused on your research problem to provide information on the issue in a condensed format. So you guys just wrote a reading response last week, and that's kind of that without an introduction and conclusion, because you don't have to do that for each article, would allow you to kind of have, here's a summary. This is what this article has to say about this topic, and critique. These are the things as a scholar that you notice are particularly interesting or useful or maybe even problematic, right? Things that are weaknesses as well in the article, right? You can take that bibliography then and turn that into a research paper, which is another common kind of writing assignment in research classes, right? So oftentimes for education classes, you'll be asked to write some version of the issues in education research paper. The paper requires you to take the research you've read, If you've already done your annotated bibliography, it makes it easier. And craft an essay in which you organize and discuss the research on your topics. So moving from bibliography, where you just have a list of sources in alphabetical order based on APA citations, that draft involves then identifying trends, patterns, or themes in your sources, noticing specific debates emerging about the topic or the issue, right? So what are the common things you see when people talk about this topic? And are there any areas that people tend to disagree about and argue about in the literature you're reading? And this way you can avoid a list-like structure when you just kind of go like chronologically. This was published first, then second, then third, then fourth, or alphabetically like your annotated bibliography. And instead, it presents a paper in which you're exploring the ideas rather than the articles, right? The articles allow you, give you information to discuss those ideas. So you classify and organize your research into categories or themes you can identify in the literature. Your paper should then begin with an introduction paragraph that introduces the topic, the background, and the purpose of your paper. Continues with body paragraphs organized by theme that share significant ideas and critique of the sources with appropriate APA-style citations, and ends with a conclusion paragraph that is followed, of course, at the end with your APA-style list of references, right? It is very similar to what we think of when we think of writing a literature review. A literature review is much like the research paper, except it's usually part of a larger project. In this way, the advice on writing research papers apply here too. Summarize and critique research, and analyze and organize that literature based on emergent themes. However, because it's part of a longer project, a literature review must do the following. It should build a foundation for the study it's connected to. It should demonstrate how the study advances the knowledge, right? So what do we already know about it, and how is your study going to add to that? It will help you conceptualize the study, right? Your approach to it. Assess research design and instrumentation. In other words, what kind of study are you doing, and how are you going to do it? Those methods questions. And provide a reference point for the interpretation of findings, right? So a lot of times what we read about what other people have done before on this topic can help us understand what to expect and how to design our studies as well. One quick note. You guys all know this, but be careful. Avoid plagiarism. There are a number of different kinds of plagiarism that can happen. One of the most common when it comes to research papers and literature reviews is insufficient paraphrasing. Insufficient paraphrasing is taking small sections of another's words or ideas and changing them into your own words without giving the writer proper credit. All borrowed words must be placed inside quotation marks and cited. If you've ever used Turnitin as a teacher, you may have gotten a paper from a student where it seemed like every other word or every few words had been changed slightly to try to trick the program. That is insufficient paraphrase. All right? When we paraphrase something, we should take that idea that's being expressed and put it completely in our own words. If we can't do that, maybe we need to use a quotation. So we put quotation marks around it and provide the proper APA citation, right? Patch writing is another way that students sometimes try to trick programs. That's taking several other texts that were written by others, piecing together those ideas or words into a single paper and turning in that paper as your own work, right? It's almost like if I just steal a little bit from different places and put it together, then people will just assume it's mine. Once again, that's a form of insufficient paraphrasing. Missing citations. Just a reminder, all sources, no matter how briefly used, must be given credit, even if you're just sharing the main idea, right? So when you're writing your literature review and you say, you know, a number of scholars have looked at this issue from this perspective, that's a great place to put that in-text citation that references all those different scholars you've seen that theme emerge from, right, in their work. And that's a great way to avoid plagiarism because it's not your idea that you're talking about. You're talking about an idea you've seen emerge from other people's work, and you're going to tell us where we can find that. That's why we have in-text citations. Fraud is the most obvious kind of plagiarism. That's turning in a paper that was written or partially written by anyone else other than you, and that's fraud, right? Anyone else includes everyone but you. There's one other kind that sometimes we don't talk about enough, and that's self-plagiarism. Submitting the same document for different assignments or different classes is a violation of the teacher-student contract. Each class has expectations for students to complete independent of other coursework, right? When I give you an assignment, I expect you to complete it because it's part of the way in which I'm trying to get you to learn things. I'm trying to teach you by doing new things. If you're just recycling papers from other classes, you're not learning anything new, right? There are times when you might want to use something and build on it, in which case you should contact your instructor for permission. Generally speaking, right, it's expected you will write brand new assignments for each class you take, even if those assignments are similar to other classes. And of course, like always, if you have any questions, send me an email. I'm here to help. Bye.